will still use the indoor bathrooms.
Yep. So, yep, good clarifications. Yes, still please use indoor bathrooms. We recognize people wouldn't have outdoor bathrooms. There is guidance for bathroom sanitation and other things. So, we would continue to use that. And yes, if somebody needs to walk through to get to outdoor seating, that would be allowed as well. Again, I think the caution there would be the number of people that crowd into that space at any given time. You have to stagger that out and make sure that is appropriately social distanced, but that doesn't need to be a barrier.
Okay. Another restaurant question. I've already purchased food for reopening, and I'm in one of the counties that is now only allowed to have outdoor seating. May I rent a tent and use that to serve food outside?
So I think that's a great thought of how to approach this. If you don't have a liquor license, then yes. If you do have a liquor license and don't have any outside seating, then we just need to work through that. But would be happy to work with that individual restaurant or any other restaurants in that situation to try to be helpful there. We recognize that may be a challenge for some.
Could they immediately open and just serve food outside and not liquor if they don't have a liquor license? If they do have a liquor license?
So if they don't have outside seating, there's no capacity to expand, and so it's a little bit different process. But it's not a multi-day process, but it's not an immediate either. So we can get really clear guidance posted right after this call.
Okay. Question, we're going to switch gears a little bit around golf courses.
Yeah.
Are driving ranges and putting greens going to be allowed in the next stage, and will I be able to play golf in another county?
Yeah, so we are updating the golf checklist now, and there will be updated checklists later today. There's a formal media advisory, so but anyway, those will get updated. We try to update those every Wednesday. The range of that goes from, some of them are small tweaks just to adjust to new executive orders. Some of them are a little bit larger changes. And for golf courses, there are a couple of changes there. Driving ranges will open. Restaurants on golf courses will open depending on their county and the other restaurant rules there. Retail shops at golf courses, to the extent that they're a retail store, now that retail will open on June 1st statewide, that those will open as well. So again, those checklist updates are really to align to the rest of the work. And yes, driving ranges and putting greens will also open, again, assuming social distancing and other kind of precautionary measures. This week did not signify the change of the county designation for golf courses at this point, but that is continuing to be reviewed.
Okay, great. And just so, because I had a specific question around disc golf and their pro shops, that would also be included with the golf courses.
It is, yep, and they would have to use the retail checklist like all retailers, including golf.
Okay, great. And there's just a question around how people will know when those checklists are posted. So I know you addressed that a little bit, but just so people, when the updates to the checklists, how do people know when to look for them, and how is that communicated?
Yeah, so we try to post them every Wednesday. We do issue an advisory when they are posted, and usually they go up at 5 o'clock. I would say, if you can look for them kind of end of day on Wednesday, that's usually when we post them. And we do post the date and time the date that they changed, so you can see have they been updated or not. And we on existing checklists that have been adjusted, you'll see that there are adjustments as well. We try to keep those in a different. The adjustments themselves are noted so that you know what's been changed.
Great. Along the checklist questions, what if my industry isn't listed anywhere? How do I know where it falls in the different stages, or what checklist to use?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get that a lot. I would say if there's not an obvious spot for you if you don't line up to any of the pieces. And we're seeing some of these groupings. We are looking at kind of creating some groupings that will make it easier for people maybe to see where they would fall. But if you have a specific type of business, if you could send us a message in the portal, we'll try to make sure that gets captured into one of the buckets.
Great. And then are there going to be other sectors added to reopening in rural areas sooner than other areas with community transmission?
Certainly it is under review. I think there is always, we look at kind of what can be done, where can it be done, what is available to us to kind of move forward. I wouldn't be surprised to see some additional looks at rural reopenings, additional components there, but we don't have anything there right now.
Okay. A lot of questions. I know we talked about this probably every week, but still questions around weddings and whether, knowing that the increases to 50 people, where are we with weddings and those types of gatherings? Any additional guidance?
Yeah, so large gathering guidance will actually be posted as one of the things that gets posted today. Or that's at least my understanding. And that looks at kind of the how do you manage social distance, how much space do you need to be able to do some of that. It also looks at, can you isolate 50 people and in an inside space, like for a restaurant, you can have 50 people inside the restaurant, 50 people outside the restaurant. As long as they're not commingling, you've got two separate groupings. And so that is included as part of the post that will go up today.
Great. A question again about yard sales this week. Parameters and guidance. The weather's getting nice. We've all been cleaning out our garages and attics. Any guidance around that? Obviously yard sales are individual activity that aren't licensed in any way. We ask people to really use their discretion about yard sales, right? People touching things and there's traffic, and how do you manage kind of the number of people at a yard sale at any time. Generally they're outside, so again, outside is a little bit safer. There is retail guidance to the extent that you're going to have a real yard sale and you want to have guidance for that. You could leverage the retail guidance, but it's not, yard sales aren't something we manage or monitor. They are individuals that have, things to sell. So we ask them to do that carefully. Great. I've got a question for folks in the motor coach business. If there's been any decisions or if there's any guidance on capacity for motor coach buses, those sorts of things, when that guidance will be expected to be out?
I don't have a good update on that. At this point, we haven't looked at motor coaches yet, but let me check and see when it's on the schedule, and we can get back to everyone as part of the Q&A.
Sure. There's a few questions about Little League sports and youth sports, and I know we put the guidelines out, but everything's moving so quickly, so maybe you can just address around youth sports and what that means. Yeah,
so we posted youth sports and community, I think we called it community sports guidance last week. It's a fairly broad look at sports and recreational activity. And then it links out to national guidance for a very specific sport. So, we've given a set of work and then linked out to, again, very specific, like baseball and little leagues versus swim or some of those kind of things. And the guidance basically says you can start practice if you want to do kind of in-town, some type of in-town scrimmaging. That's probably okay depending on the type of sport, but certainly strongly discourages kind of cross-town scrimmaging or games, and certainly adamantly kind of discourages any out-of-state or cross-county activity.
Okay, great. So a lot of questions about the quarantine, specifically as it pertains to June. With June 1st coming, if we could touch on who's allowed to stay and where they're allowed to stay and what the parameters are for the quarantine for any out-of-staters.
Yeah, so the quarantine is a complicated one, right? So I'll try to talk through that. Again, before we get too far down the quarantine path, I do want to say, right, we continue to look at other solutions. We recognize quarantine is, for lack of a better term, a more blunt instrument and not quite as targeted at the individual and specific challenges that we're looking to solve. So we continue to look for alternatives to the quarantine. But to try to answer, Kate, the question that you asked is for the quarantine in June, the requirement is Maine resident or someone who's already quarantined in Maine. So think of that as people who probably have second homes or RVs or other things that mean that they've been in Maine for an extended period of time, and their risk threshold would look like someone else from Maine. And so that's kind of step one. In July, that changes and allows people to quarantine here in our lodging establishments. So that's the difference. And I think maybe why it's a little bit confusing is there's one set of parameters for June and then a different set of parameters that are a little bit more loose for July.
Okay, great. As far as when you get here, if you're traveling from out of state in July or August, there's some questions around right now as the quarantine stands and understanding that we're working to make changes. Are people required to stay for the entire 14 days, or could they come for a weekend and quarantine the entire time they're here? What does that look like? Are they required to stay for the whole time?
They are not. So if you come to Maine in July or August, you have to quarantine while you're here, recognizing most people don't come for 14 days. But if you come for 14 or more days, you would need to quarantine for that period of time. But if you come for 4 days, you need to quarantine while you're here.
Okay. And then one more quarantine question is around takeout and curbside. So if somebody's here and they're quarantining in July, can they get takeout, curbside? Do they need to receive things by delivery? And I would assume that's pertaining to the restaurant industry.
Yeah, so the goal would be if you come to not have contact with other people, right? That's what the quarantine is about, to try to keep separation between people who may be asymptomatic, but potentially are coming from places where there's a lot of transmission of the virus. So the intent would be to reduce contact. I think lodging establishments are putting into place creative ways to get food and other resources to people who might want to come and quarantine in their hotels. So we are encouraging that path.
Okay, great. And sorry, I do have one more quarantine question. As it pertains to these youth sports, some of the leagues in Southern Maine have players in New Hampshire, and they're based in Maine. With the youth sports being able to start, would these players from New Hampshire be allowed to come participate in practice, or for right now, does it need to just be limited to Maine kids?
You know, for right now, the intent would be Maine kids, but certainly, you know, I think it's something we can look at. It's not something we have discussed. We certainly have workers that go back and forth across the Maine-New Hampshire border to do work, and we have made an allowance for that, recognizing that it happens on a daily basis. But we don't have that accommodation for kids in youth sports yet. But we can certainly review that, or have the health working team review that.
Great. For campgrounds, are they able to open their playgrounds on June 1st?
I know that's in the checklist, but I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I'm going to refer to the checklist, and maybe that's one that we can send out after.
A question around masks. I think it just might make sense. There's quite a few questions about who's required to wear them. Are employees required? You know, again, I use probably better off using the term face coverings versus masks, but I think it's important to maybe touch on that today.
Yeah, so face coverings have been kind of a real bone of contention across the country. I'm sure lots of people saw the North Dakota governor kind of come out with a really impassioned statement. There were a couple of other governors that we've seen in the last few days come out with their messages as well, looking at this cloth face covering. And again, I'm not the public health expert, but cloth face coverings are designed to protect the people around you, not you. And there's really nothing partisan about a cloth face covering. It is part of how we keep the people around us safe. So having said that, the executive order requires employees to wear them, and employers to mandate employees wearing them unless there's a medical condition. There are some cases, like in kitchens, in restaurants, that face shields can be replaced, or I know some grocery store, we've waived that in the EO for grocery stores, people that would have them on all day. There are a couple of choices, right? Cloth face coverings, plastic face shields. There are a couple of choices there based on people's medical conditions and different things. So there are certainly reasons. There are a couple of medical situations where people won't be wearing masks. Outside of that, everyone should wear a mask when they're inside and in kind of crowded areas.
Great. Wondering if the current capacity limits for retail stores will adjust in June, or if there's a timeline for adjusting how many people can be in a store.
We get the retail question a lot, and retailers have done a really great job, I think, since this started, managing traffic flow, really changing behaviors in stores of how people shop and how people get the essential things that they need. And so that will be looked at again. I think the step that we're taking right now is June 1 opening retail in the rest of the state. I would expect that will happen and settle a little bit before we would make another move there. But it is on the list. I think it's clear that retailers are asking for that and want that. And so we'll look at that. We've also seen some creative towns doing some look at using sidewalks for not just restaurants, but for retail as well, to limit the capacity issues in stores.
Great. Another capacity question, but this time around restaurants. Does staff and servers count towards the capacity count for restaurants?
They do not. We did not count staff as part of either retail or restaurant capacities.
Okay. And then outdoor establishments with greater than 60,000 square feet open space, can they accommodate more than 50 people, or do they need to stick to that limit?
Right now, 50 is the gathering limit, and so there isn't a balance to the amount of space that you have. It is about partitioning people in a way that there's no commingling.
Right. And what about, so is it 50 people inside and 50 people outside, or is it 50 total? So in other words, can a restaurant, if a restaurant can serve inside, can they have 50 there and then an additional 50 outside?
Yeah, so if a restaurant is in one of the counties that has inside dining, they can have 50 people inside and 50 people outside. Now, again, to have the 50 people in either of those spaces, you have to be able to appropriately social distance. You have to be able to spread people out in the appropriate way. But if the space is large enough to handle 50 people appropriately socially distanced, then yes, they can have that.
Okay. Gymnastic centers or dance facilities, will they be allowed to open on June 1st?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's something that we are working on clarifying. Dance studios and karate studios were aligned to gyms, and I think that right now hasn't changed. I think where that gets confusing are people that do summer camps and do those activities as part of a summer camp. And so We are working on a clarifying statement for that, and I don't have that yet.
Okay. When will overnight windjammers be allowed to sail, and are there guidelines for that, and when would they be available?
Yeah, so Commissioner Kelleher at the Division of Marine Resources is working on some of that work as we speak. We don't have that yet. The distancing part, I think, is the challenge. The distancing and enough people to make it operate is that balance there that so we'll have to get back to people on that one.
Okay. The Bureau of Motor Vehicles has indicated that DECD is researching driver education protocol. When do you expect we'll have a checklist and timeline for driver's ed?
I expect we'll have that posted next week. There's a lot of national guidance around driver's ed. I don't think that we will necessarily put a lot on that. I think we will try to leverage the national guidance there. All states are facing that same kind of pretty similar challenge, and driver's ed, right, instruction looks pretty similar nationally. And so I think in partnership with the Secretary of State's office, obviously where Bureau of Motor Vehicles sits, they are the lead there. We are a supporting mechanism to that, and I would expect to see that next week.
Okay.
The checklist next week and the guidance. Sorry.
That's okay. Indoor concert venues where people are seated with less than 50 people, is that allowed in June?
So we don't have any concert venues yet that we have kind of put checklists together for. We've done some work with some live venues. If there are venues that can operate under 50 people, then, let's connect directly. So if you can put that into the portal or let us know directly, we'd like to work with them and make sure that they have what they need to get moving. But, the concept of the distancing and the number of people in a room and the length of time, there are a number of factors there that I'm sure the healthcare experts will want to weigh in on. But if they can operate under 50, then I think we can try to figure something out.
Okay, great. Can a campground snack bar operations fall into the same category as restaurants?
Snack bars would operate more like a little bit more like counter service or takeout service, in that they wouldn't have to track the log, right? People would come in, get their snack, maybe sit at a picnic table or someplace distanced, but the length of time that they would be in contact wouldn't require them to do to keep the log of the contact tracing. Usually that's a much faster transaction, and we have outlined for those kind of quick transactions that the contact log wouldn't be required, but the food service could be.
Right. And maybe we could just take a minute to touch on that contact tracing for fast food restaurants. I know it's been a question, and guidance is getting posted today, but with this group on the webinar.
That's right. Sorry. Yeah. So we've gotten the question, and it made sense. So we took a look at that, and the healthcare team has outlined that for fast food restaurants and kind of those transactional, right? If you go to an ice cream stand, you order your ice cream, you take it, and you go. Potentially you sit at a picnic table, but likely you go. That those types of establishments wouldn't need to keep a log of who was there because of the short duration of their visit. They would, however, have to follow all of the other social distancing protocols and mask wearing and taped cues and all of that. And I think people have done a really good job with that.
Great. When will museum guidelines be released, and who did you work with when creating those guidelines?
Museum guidelines will go up today, is my understanding. They're part of the packet that will go up today. And actually, I wasn't the lead on museums, so I can't answer that second part of the question.
Okay. When is Maine going to initiate a small business recovery and relief plan using the CARES Act funds? Some other states are establishing that funding stream, wondering if Maine's going to follow.
Yeah, so some other states have got some really creative ideas that we are looking at. New Hampshire has theirs kind of queued up. Utah has some interesting work as well. So we are looking at that and trying to figure out how do we get input and what will that look like. And so next week at this point, maybe we can have that discussion in a more comprehensive way to make sure that we are getting input from this group on what that looks like before we do any finalizing.
Great. Back to small gatherings. Someone's looking for some clarification. Does that mean they can't have small indoor weddings or baby showers? Do they need to be outside, or can they be inside at this point?
So the gathering guidance doesn't designate inside versus outside at this point. Again, the gatherings up to 50 do require masking and some of those other things, right? The difference between that and a restaurant is at a restaurant you can't wear a mask and you can't do some of the other things that would potentially offset the impacts of being inside. So the large gathering guidance will be posted today, and for things like weddings and baby showers and those types of things, that's what it's intended for. It's really difficult, right? Those are intentionally about congregation and about hugging and all of the things that go with those types of events, and so it's difficult to keep those socially distanced in an appropriate way. But the guidelines are there and there to be used.
Okay. I know the governor addressed this, was asked and addressed this in the press conference today, but I have a lot of questions about breweries and tasting rooms.
Yep.
And wondering where we are in the process and if there's a path forward to open before July 1st.
I think, again, I'd say this a lot, but we continue to look at choices and what is safe. So right now there are 63 breweries that can open based on kind of where they are in their current license. So I haven't checked to see. I know a couple of them aren't open yet, but are planning to open this weekend. For the rest, there's still more work to be done, either based on where they are or the type of license that they have. And so we continue to look at that and to consider that. We're looking at New Hampshire and Vermont and some of their approach. And again, how do you take these steps in a way that you can isolate the risk when you have one?
Okay. Circling back to the question around tents, and I know there's licensing concerns and those sorts of things, but as far as the guidelines are concerned, are tents okay for outdoor dining? Are there any specifications? As long as the licensing works out and the municipality coding and all those things.
Yeah, there's nothing about tents in the guidance. The outdoor kind of circulation, right, is the value point there. So you probably would want to put sides and zip people into a tent, right? You see occasionally, but that is you'll see outdoor guidance, very specific outdoor guidance will get posted later today as well to try to help people see kind of what's required and then what's preferred, or what has better health outcomes than other things.
And with outdoor dining, and again, I know the checklists are coming, but there's lots of questions.
Yep.
Outdoor dining, is that for takeout only, or is that also, can there be table service for outdoor dining? So can servers come to the table and do regular table service?
Yep, no, it can be regular table service or takeout or either. It can be counter service that people take it, order it and sit, or it can be regular table service, whichever in the outdoor, but it just has to be outdoor.
Okay. Some questions around bike and kayak rentals, river tube rentals. Are those allowed? Is there a checklist for those? Is that in a different stage?
Yeah, so the IFNW folks did those kind of did a checklist for that kind of rental. We link out, I believe it's on our site and links to the IFNW page. It looks at at basically sanitation between use and how much downtime between use, those types of things.
Stage 3 guidelines have no instruction yet for movie theaters, entertainment centers, bowling alleys, etc. Is there guidance coming? Any thoughts on when those will be allowed to open?
Yeah, so stage 3 is targeted for July 1st. Again, we look at things on a very ongoing basis and look for things that we can pull forward to have earlier. And obviously today we had to move a portion of something back. So the guidance is being worked for the next stage. We just finished this stage. The public health working team in partnership with the specific industry just finished this stage. Then now we'll shift forward to the next look.
Great. Is there a timeline on when a decision will be made regarding anestheticians and other personal services like that?
Personal services, yes. So is there the question is there a timeline for that?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it currently is sitting in stage 3. There's certainly a lot of look, and Commissioner Head and her team are working on that, on kind of the how and the when, and we should have more on that in the next week or so.
Great. A question here around fitting rooms, wondering if there's any additional guidance coming on fitting rooms, how folks might be able to open them in a safe and responsible way.
Yeah, right now fitting rooms are closed, and there isn't a short-term intent to open them. We're hearing from wedding dress shops that they need them open, and so there is a look at, is there a waiver for wedding dress shops? I think that discussion is underway. I don't think there's an intent to more broadly open fitting rooms than that.
Okay. A question, can you please clarify the difference between the 50-person gathering limit and the current retail store limits? There's been lots of questions around retailers complying with certain specifications, and then other people have to limit to 50 people.
I think I can. So retail, there is a retail set of a number of people that can be in any given retailer. The intent is people are moving through a retail location and out. They aren't staying there. There are some stores, the really large physical stores, can have more than 50 people in them. Most stores don't. So yes, I think the difference is those 50 people aren't gathered together. They are moving and separate, and that's the intent. So yeah, it's a good question, right? We continue to look at guidance and how one set of guidance affects another set of guidance, and trying to make sure that they are all connected. But it is the 50-person gathering is about the gathering in the location.
Okay, great. A question, and I think this falls into the indoor entertainment, but I've seen a few different questions about whether escape rooms can be open.
You know, escape rooms haven't been a specific item, and they would likely fall into inside amusement, and that hasn't been reviewed yet.
Okay. There's some more sports questions around on the guidance checklist. It talks about scrimmages and games are highly discouraged.
Yeah.
And it's being construed by local communities that they should not be renting their facilities for sports.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between team sports that have more contact or less contact. Mm-hmm. I think some people are looking for some clarification around what discouraged means and how they can work around some of that.
Yeah, you know, I think what you're seeing there is trying to create an umbrella look at what's safe and what are these gradations of safe, and then how do you let kind of as much local control happen as can be. And so, you know, that's what that is about, right? Is it it's certainly safer to play, potentially it's safer to play baseball than it is to play basketball, right? Which is a lot more physical contact. To get that granular with every grouping of, youth sports, I think would be impractical. And so we tried to create this umbrella guidance that people could then kind of make good decisions based on. And let local communities kind of make their decisions.
Okay, great. Indoor pools, are those allowed to be open as part of lodging facilities? And if so, also, sorry, just tying in with the pools, whether water aerobics classes can be offered if they're complying with the number of people in an outdoor class?
So no indoor aerobics classes. So I don't know if
it'd be like a water aerobics because the pool is open is the question.
Well, if the pool is inside, then no.
Okay.
So I'd say that's no. And I don't know about pools for hotels. My recollection is in June, pools and lodging needs to be closed, but let me just pulling up the checklist now. Go ahead, Kate. I'll come back to that. I'll answer that question in a minute.
Great. Next question is there any status updates for photographers? It's unclear if we can get a badge for outdoor photo shoots, if we can have indoor photo shoots.
Yeah, so let me go back to the pool. So pools are lap pool. Indoor pools are recommended to be limited to single swim lanes only. So that's that answer. And then so photographers we're gonna make that a little bit more clear as part of these groupings that we have. But photographers for outdoor shoots, again, based on kind of numbers of people, and that I think will be much more clear early next week.
Okay, great. Are outdoor water parks allowed to be open? And if not, is there a timeline for those?
Yeah, so none of the large amusement facilities are kind of in this current stage. But we have had a couple of calls with a number of those players in Maine, and are trying to work to see if there is an opportunity there that can keep people under the gathering limit, but give them enough, operating value to make it make sense. But we don't have a good answer there yet.
Okay. I'm a Maine guide. Can I transport my guest to and from the river in my own vehicle?
So transportation guidance will get posted today, and we'll look at kind of numbers of people's per car. And so depending on the number of people, I think yes. But if you can look for the transportation guidance today, that would be helpful.
Okay. Back to just activities that people can do when they're quarantining. I think there were some questions about what people could do during quarantine. Are they allowed to go swimming? Can they go hiking?
Yeah. So, I mean, the intent of a quarantine is to keep people away from other people, right? If you think about what the intent and why you do it, it's to really keep people away from other people. So if you can, hike alone or with the group that, you came and are quarantining with, but not be in contact with other people, things like that are, we have said that is okay. So that's something that's out there. But again, the whole concept of quarantine is to not be with other people.
Okay.
Except the people that you're already quarantining with, obviously.
Right. Outdoor concerts, is there the possibility that outdoor concerts could follow the same rules as drive-in movie theaters? Is that a possibility?
You mean with people in their cars, staying in their cars?
That was the question, is it possible for outdoor concerts to have the same guidelines as drive-in movie theaters?
We haven't looked at that yet. We can certainly put it on the list to review. I think the logical questions are, what do you do about bathrooms? How do you make sure people stay in their cars? Those types of things. Happy to put that on the review list though, and have the public health experts weigh in.
Okay, great. Lots of questions about nail salons. If there's a timeline for when they'll be able to reopen, folks looking for some guidance on that.
Yeah, so nail salons are part of the ongoing review. So we have some scheduled review and then some ongoing review. And nail salons are part of the ongoing review to work through. So I don't have a good update today, but again, that gets reviewed, every day or two. And so as we have an update, we can get that out to everyone.
I think it would be great. There's some questions around folks that have requested exemptions for their business through the portal and through our department. So just sort of maybe talk about what the process is for people who submit suggestions and how we're handling that moving forward.
Yeah, so what we do, and apologize to those of you who heard this last week, I think I said the same thing, but we take all of that in and we group that information into sectors, and then we work that through this process, right, of what's the input by sector, what contact do we have kind of in that sector, and to aggregate the processes. And then there is a working group that is made up of a number of public health experts that take kind of this business feedback in. They look at kind of these points of contact and duration of contact and a variety of other factors. They give information back. The appropriate department, right, depending on who that is, if it's DECD or others, take that back out to folks in the industry and some of the people that provided input in the portal or others to weigh in again and see, are any of the changes untenable? What does that look like? Are they operational? Those types of things. And then it gets finalized. We aren't doing exceptions at the individual business level right now until we get through kind of these large stages.
Okay, great. Is there any guidance for how lodging can enforce the quarantine that for out-of-state visitors? Is there, do we have any guidance, or is there guidance coming or feedback on how that can be handled by individual lodging facilities?
Yeah, so Steve Hewins and the Hospitality Maine team are working on a program in partnership with the community college to look at some of these lodging. They're already doing a restaurant one, but now we're looking at a lodging one as well. So kind of what are the protocols? How do we execute that? What keeps you safe? What keeps the visitors safe? Those types of things. So my guess is there'll be some support there from that group. Additionally, at the state, we are looking at an enforcement plan for its release that looks at a really tiered system and with kind of local support and state support to try to execute enforcement there. And there's more to come on that. I'm not sure if it'll come this week or early next week.
How about nonprofit mentoring organizations? Can we allow one-on-one meetings? This one's specific to Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, but I think there are a lot of mentoring organizations that would benefit from sort of knowing whether those meetings are allowed, gatherings, those kinds of things.
Yeah, so stage 2 allows for kind of office people to kind of slowly work their way back into office environments, and that would be kind of similar. Obviously, Big Brothers and Big Sisters is an office environment, but it's similar in nature to it's been done remotely so far. Now, do you go back to in-person? Certainly, we are encouraging people for as long as possible to stay remote and not do additional in-person work that's not required. But we recognize that people have things that you can't efficiently do remotely, and so some people will need to go back to an office environment. But again, we try to encourage people to work remotely as much and as long as possible.
Okay, great. Back to another sports question. This one has to do with baseball. And do people need to social distance in dugouts?
Yeah, well, that would be the encouragement, right? Again, the rules around community sports and youth sports are most really look at kind of pushing out to these national guidance and to try to use best practices and be thoughtful about, how would you do that? Some of it depends on the age as well, of the players. Some of these community sports are adults, and they're, social distancing and masking and dugouts and things like that are very different than, 7-year-olds that are under the mask age anyway. So I would say, look at the guidelines, and we're really encouraging people to use good judgment there.
Okay. I think this question has to do with campgrounds, but someone's asking if they're able to open up basketball, volleyball courts, horseshoes, cornhole fields, as long as there's not more than 50 people playing.
So again, I would refer people back to the checklist. There are very specific rules on this for each industry. And campgrounds has a checklist that looks at that. So I just want to be careful not to kind of give people different guidance than that.
Sure. And again, those updates will be up later today. They're not quite done yet. I expect them to be up around between 5 and 6 o'clock this evening.
Right. Campgrounds isn't updated though, so that should
right. Correct. That's true. A couple questions about whether a negative test or proof that someone's already had the coronavirus and they have the antibodies, if that is an override to the quarantine. So, there's obviously a number of recovered people in our neighboring states, and would that work in lieu of a quarantine?
Yeah, so testing, again, we've talked about testing for a long time. Testing has always been part of a solution that is an alternative to a quarantine. We don't have that solution ready to go yet. So I would say not yet, but certainly there is lots of ongoing work along that line right now. The antibody test, CDC, the US CDC just downgraded antibody testing as well last night. So I think, that may be a different question than the core question, which is testing an alternative to quarantine? And I think we are working down a path to see if it can be.
Okay. Just a clarification, and I don't know if we've been on for a while now. I can't remember if you answered, but the whether in playing golf, if people can go to different counties to play golf at this point, will that change on June 1st?
So, I'm sorry. The county requirement will hold at the golf courses for this week. Yeah. We did not make that change this week.
Okay. And then back to sports, would adult college sports, not youth sport, would they also look at those guidelines for community sports? So if it's college students coming to do athletics, or is that something different?
So colleges are creating their own set of standards, and we are working kind of in conjunction with them, but colleges are creating their own set of standards.
Okay. All right. What about Maine beaches? We know some of the beaches are still closed. Is there a timeline for when some of these southern and mid-coast beaches will be opening?
Yeah, so the coastal beaches, we have 10 coastal state parks closed right now, and most of them are beaches, and they will open on June 1st. Okay.
And municipal playgrounds, are they able to open in June?
We don't issue guidance on municipal playgrounds, so we defer to the municipalities on anything that they own. So I will defer that to the locals.
Sure. And then just a follow up to the face covering question. Questions whether customers are required to wear masks and the role that businesses play in that. I know we've talked about it, but there still seem to be some questions around that.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension, I think, on who enforces the mask rules. And right now, businesses don't have to enforce the mask rules on customers. I think that we encourage them to, And we've, under the executive order, they are certainly allowed to refuse service to someone without a mask if they choose to. But right now, in the existing executive order, they are not required to enforce it.
Okay.
They're strongly encouraged, I think, is the language in the executive order.
So there's some questions from the lodging industry around this week of June 27th through July 4th and how they would handle reservations during that time. It's just a block of time in a week that that people stay. Should they follow July guidelines or June guidelines? So just looking for some clarification.
Yeah, I think traditionally, right, for traditional summers, that's the first week kids are out of school. And
Yep.
so there's a spike that week, and those tours look more like July tours than they look like June and May tours.